Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. This is episode 33, and I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Dear little Carol Bird prepares a marvelous feast for the Ruggles children. She has thought of everything: turkey, cranberry sauce, desserts galore, and best of all, presents for everyone. Finally, at the very end of the evening, the church next door has prepared some very special Christmas music for Carol and her family to listen to through their open windows. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. The Bird's Christmas Carol, Chapter 5. Some Other Birds Are Taught to Fly. Before the earliest Ruggles could wake and toot his 5-cent tin horn, Mrs. Ruggles was up and stirring about the house, for it was a gala day in the family. Gala day, I should think so. Were not her 9 children invited to a dinner party at the great house, and weren't they going to sit down free and equal with the mightiest in the land? She had been preparing for this grand occasion ever since the receipt of Carol Bird's invitation, which, by the way, had been speedily enshrined in an old photograph frame and hung under the looking-glass in the most prominent place in the kitchen, where it stared the occasional visitor directly in the eye and made him livid with envy. Bird's Nest, December 17th, 1880. Dear Mrs. Ruggles, I am going to have a dinner party on Christmas Day, and I would like to have all your children come. I want them every one, please, from Sarah Maud to baby Larry. Mamma says dinner will be at 5:30, and the Christmas tree at 7, so you may expect them home at 9 o'clock. Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, I am yours truly, Carol Bird. Breakfast was on the table promptly at 7 o'clock, and there was very little of it, too, for it was an excellent day for short rations, though Mrs. Ruggles heaved a sigh as she reflected that the boys, with their India-rubber stomachs, would be just as hungry the day after the dinner party as if they had never had any at all. As soon as the scanty meal was over, she announced the plan of the campaign. Now, Susan, you and Kitty wash up the dishes, and Peter, can't you spread up the bed so I can get to cutting out Larry's new suit? I ain't satisfied with his clothes, and I thought in the night of a way to make him dressed out in my old red plaid shawl, kind of a Scotch style, you know, with the fringe at the bottom. Ely, you go find the comb and take the snarls out of the fringe, that's a lady. You little ones, clear out from underfoot. Clem, you and Con hop into bed with Larry while I wash your underflannins. 'Twon't take too long to dry them. Yes, I know it's bothersome, but you can't go into society without taking some trouble. And anyhow, I couldn't get round to them last night. Sarah Maud, I think 'twould be perfectly handsome if you ripped them brass buttons off your uncle's policeman coat and sewed 'em up in a row on the front of your green skirt. Susan, you must iron out yours and Kitty's aprons. And there, I come mighty near forgetting Peory's stockings. I counted the whole lot last night when I was washing them, and there ain't but 19 anyhow you fix 'em, and no 9 pairs mates nohow. And I ain't going to have my children wear odd stockings to a dinner company, fetched up as I was. Ely, can't you run out and ask Mrs. Cullens to lend me a pair of stockings for Miss Peory, and tell her if she will, Peory'll give Jim half her candy when she gets home, won't you, Peory? Peoria was young and greedy, and thought the remedy so out of all proportion to the disease that she set up a deafening howl at the projected bargain, a howl so rebellious and so entirely out of season that her mother started in her direction with flashing eyes and uplifted hand, but she let it fall suddenly, saying, "No, I vow I won't lick you Christmas Day if you drive me crazy, but speak up smart now, and say whether you'd rather give Jim Cullen half of your candy or go bare-legged to the party. The matter being put so plainly, Peoria collected her faculties, dried her tears, and chose the lesser evil, Clem having hastened the decision by an affectionate wink that meant he'd go halves with her on his candy. "That's a lady," cried her mother. "Now, you young'uns that ain't doin' nothin', play all you want before noontime, for after you get through eating at 12 o'clock, me and Sarah Maud's going to give you such a washing and a combing and a dressing as you never seen before and never will again likely. And then I'm going to set you down and give you 2 solid hours in training in manners, and it won't be no foolin' neither." "All we've got to do is go and eat," grumbled Peter. "Well, that's enough," responded his mother. "There's more than one way of eating, let me tell you. And you've got a heap to learn about it, Peter Ruggles. Land sakes! I wish you children could see the way I was fetched up to eat. I never took a meal of victuals in the kitchen before I married Ruggles. But you can't keep up that style with 9 young'uns, and your pa always off to sea." The big Ruggleses worked so well, and the little Ruggleses kept from underfoot so successfully, that by 1 o'clock, 9 complete toilettes were laid out in solemn grandeur on the bed. I say complete, but I do not know whether they would be called so in the best society. The law of compensation had been well applied. He that had necktie had no cuffs. She that had sash had no handkerchief, and vice versa. But they all had shoes and a certain amount of clothing, such as it was, the outside layer being in every case quite above criticism. "Now, Sarah Maud," said Mrs. Ruggles, her face shining with excitement, "everything's red and up, and we can begin. I've got a boiler and a kettle and a pot of hot water. Peter, you go into the back bedroom, and I'll take Kitty, Susan, Peory, and Cornelius. And Sarah Maud, you take Clem and Ely and Larry, one at a time, scrub 'em and rinse 'em, or at any rate, get as fur as you can with them, and then I'll finish 'em off while you do yourself." Sarah Maud couldn't have scrubbed with any more decision and force if she had been doing floors, and the little Ruggleses bore it bravely, not from natural heroism, but for the joy that was set before them, not being satisfied, however, with the tone of their complexions, and feeling that the number of freckles to the square inch was too many to be tolerated in the highest social circles. She wound up operations by applying a little Bristol brick from the knife-board, which served as the proverbial last straw, from under which the little Ruggleses issued rather red and raw and out of temper. When the clock struck 4, they were all clothed, and most of them in their right minds, ready for those last touches that always take the most time. Kitty's red hair was curled in 34 ringlets. Sarah Maud's was braided in 1 pigtail, and Susan's and Ely's in 2 braids apiece, while Peoria resisted all advances in the shape of hair oils, and stuck out straight on all sides, like the little girl in the circus, so Clem said, and he was sent into the bedroom for it too, from whence he was dragged out forgivingly by Peoria herself 5 minutes later. Then, exciting moment, came linen collars for some, and neckties and bows for others. A magnificent green glass breastpin was sewn into Peter's purple necktie, and eureka! The Ruggleses were dressed, and Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. A row of seats was then formed directly through the middle of the kitchen. Of course, there were not quite enough chairs for 10, since the family had rarely wanted to sit down all at once, somebody always being out or in bed or otherwise engaged. But the woodbox and the coal hod finished out the line nicely, and nobody thought of grumbling. The children took their places according to age, Sarah Maud at the head, and Larry on the coal hod, and Mrs. Ruggles seated herself in front, surveying them proudly as she wiped the sweat of honest toil from her brow. "Well," she exclaimed, "if I do say as I shouldn't, I never seen a cleaner, more stylish mess of children in my life. I do wish Ruggles could look at you for a moment. Larry Ruggles, how many times have I got to tell you not to keep pulling at your sash? Haven't I told you that if it comes untied, your waist and skirt'll part company in the middle, and then where'll you be? Now look me in the eye, all of you. I've often told you what kind of a family the McGrills was. I've got reason to be proud, goodness knows. Your uncle is on the police force of New York City. You can take up the paper most any day and see his name printed right out. James McGrill. And I can't have my children fetched up common like some folks. When they go out, they've got to have clothes and learn to act decent. Now I want to see how you're going to behave when you get there tonight. 'Tain't so awful easy as you think 'tis. Let's start at the beginning and act out the whole business. Pile into the bedroom there, every last one of you, and show me how you're going to go into the parlor. This'll be the parlor, and I'll be Miss Bird." The youngsters hustled into the next room in high glee, and Mrs. Ruggles drew herself up in the chair with an infinitely haughty and purse-proud expression that much better suited a descendant of the McGrills than modest Mrs. Bird. The bedroom was small, and there presently ensued such a clatter that you would have thought a herd of wild cattle had broken loose. The door opened, and they straggled in, all the younger ones giggling, with Sarah Maud at the head, looking as if she had been caught in the act of stealing sheep, while Larry, being last in line, seemed to think the door a sort of gate of heaven, which would be shut in his face if he didn't get there in time. Accordingly, he struggled ahead of his elders, and disgraced himself by tumbling in head foremost. Mrs. Ruggles looked severe. "There, I knew you'd do it in some such fool way. Now go in there and try it over again, every last one of you. And if Larry can't come in on 2 legs, he can stay at home. Do you hear?" The matter began to assume a graver aspect. The little Ruggleses stopped giggling and backed into the room, issuing presently with lockstep, Indian file, a scared and hunted expression on every countenance. "No, no, no," cried Mrs. Ruggles in despair. "That's worse yet. You look for all the world like a gang of prisoners. There ain't no style to that. Spread out more. Nobody's going to kill you. That ain't what a dinner party is." The third time brought deserved success, and the pupils took their seats in the row. "Now you know," said Mrs. Ruggles impressively, "there ain't enough decent hats to go around. And if there was, I don't know as I'd let you wear them, for the boys would never think to take them off when they get inside. They never do. But anyhow, there ain't enough good ones. Now look me in the eye. You're only going just around the corner. You needn't wear no hats, none of you. And when you get into the parlor and they ask you to lay off your hats, Sarah Maud must speak up and say it was such a pleasant evening and such a short walk that you left your hats at home. Now can you remember?" All the little Ruggles shouted, "Yes, ma'am." "What have you got to do with it?" demanded their mother. "Did I tell you to say it? Wasn't I talking to Sarah Maud?" "Yes, ma'am," they piped more discreetly. "Now we won't leave nothing to chance. Get up, all of you, and try it. Speak up, Sarah Maud." Sarah Maud's tongue clove to the roof of her mouth. "Quick! Ma thought it was such a pleasant hat that we thought we'd better leave our short walk to home," recited Sarah Maud in an agony of mental effort. This was too much for the boys. An earthquake of suppressed giggles swept all along the line. "Oh, whatever shall I do with you?" moaned the unhappy mother. "I suppose I've got to learn it to you," which she did, word for word, until Sarah Maud thought she could stand on her head and say it backward. "Now, Cornelius, what are you going to say to make yourself good company?" "Me? I don't know," said Cornelius, turning pale with unexpected responsibility. "Well, you ain't going to sit there like a bump on a log without saying a word to pay for your victuals, are you? Ask Mrs. Bird how she's feeling this evening, or if Mr. Bird's having a busy season, or how this kind of weather agrees with him, or something like that. Now we'll make believe we've got to the dinner. That won't be so hard, 'cause you'll have something to do. It's awful bothersome standing around acting stylish. If they have napkins, Sarah Maud, down to Peory, may put them in their laps, and the rest of you can tuck them in your necks. Don't eat with your fingers. Don't grab no victuals off one another's plates. Don't reach out for nothing, but wait till you're asked. And if you never get asked, don't get up and grab it. Don't spill nothing on the tablecloth, or like as not, Miss Bird'll send you away from your table. And I hope she will if you do. Susan, keep your handkerchief in your lap, where Peory can borrow it if she needs it. And I hope she knows when she does need it, though I don't expect it. Now we'll try a few things to see how they go. Mr. Clement, do you eat cranberry sauce? Bet your life, cried Clem, who in the excitement of the moment had not taken in the idea exactly, and had mistaken this for an ordinary bosom-of-the-family question. Clement McGrill Ruggles, do you mean to tell me that you would say that to a dinner party? I'll give you one more chance. Mr. Clement, would you take some of the cranberry? Yes, ma'am, thank you kindly, if you happen to have any handy. Very good indeed. But they won't give you 2 tries tonight, you just remember that. Miss Peory, do you speak for white meat or dark meat? I ain't particular as to color. Anything that nobody else wants will suit me, answered Peory with her best air. First rate. Nobody could speak more genteel than that. Miss Kitty, will you have hard or soft sauce with your puddin'? Hard or soft? Oh, a little of both, if you please. And I'm much obliged, said Kitty, bowing with decided ease and grace, at which all the other Ruggleses pointed the finger of shame at her, and Peter grunted expressively, that their meaning might not be mistaken. You just stop your grunting, Peter Ruggles. That weren't greedy, that was all right. I wish I could get it into your heads that it ain't so much what you say as the way you say it. And don't keep staring cross-eyed at your necktie pin, or I'll take it out and sew it on to Clem or Cornelius. Sarah Maud'll keep her eye on it, and if it turns broken side out, she'll tell you. Gracious! I shouldn't think you'd ever seen nor worn no jewelry in your life. Ely, you and Larry's too little to train, so you just look at the rest and do as they do. And the Lord have mercy on you and help you to act decent. Now, is there anything more you'd like to practice? If you tell me one more thing, I can't sit up and eat, said Peter gloomily. I'm so crammed full of manners now, I'm ready to burst, without no dinner at all. Me too, chimed in Cornelius. Well, I'm sorry for you both, rejoined Mrs. Ruggles sarcastically. If the amount of manners you've got on hand now troubles you, you're dreadful easy hurt. Now, Sarah Maud, after dinner, about once in every so often, you must get up and say, I guess we better be going. And if they say, oh no, set a while longer, you can set. But if they don't say nothing, then you've got to get up and go. Now, have you got that into your head? About once and so often? Could any words in the language be fraught with more terrible and wearing uncertainty? Well, answered Sarah Maud mournfully, it seems as if this whole dinner party sits right square on top of me. Maybe I could manage my own manners, but to manage 9 manners is worse than to staying home. Oh, don't fret, said her mother good-naturedly, now that the lesson was over. I guess you'll get along. I wouldn't mind if folks would only say, oh, children will be children, but they won't. They'll say, land o' goodness, who fetched them children up? It's 5:15, and you can go now. Remember about the hats. And don't talk all at once. Susan, lend your handkerchief to Peory. Peter, don't keep screwing your scarf pin. Cornelius, hold your head up straight. Sarah Maud, don't take your eyes off of Larry. And Larry, you keep hold of Sarah Maud and do just as she says. And whatever you do, all of you, never forget for 1 second that your mother was a McGrill. Chapter 6. When the Pie Was Opened. The children went out of the back door quietly, and were presently lost to sight, Sarah Maud slipping and stumbling along absent-mindedly, as she recited rapidly under her breath, It was such a pleasant evening, such a short walk, that we thought we'd leave our hats to home. It was such a pleasant evening and such a short walk that we thought we'd leave our hats to home. Peter rang the doorbell, and presently a servant admitted them, and whispering something in Sarah's ear, drew her downstairs into the kitchen. The other Ruggleses stood in horror-stricken groups as the door closed behind their commanding officer. But there was no time for reflection, for a voice from above was heard saying, "Come right upstairs, please." Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do or die. Accordingly, they walked upstairs, and Elfrida, the nurse, ushered them into a room more splendid than anything they had ever seen. But, oh woe, where was Sarah Maud? And was it fate that Mrs. Bird should say at once, "Did you lay your hats in the hall?" Peter felt himself elected by circumstance the head of the family, and casting one imploring look at the tongue-tied Susan standing next to him, said huskily, "It was so very pleasant that we hadn't good hats enough to go round," put in little Susan bravely to help him out, and then froze with horror that the ill-fated words had slipped off her tongue. However, Mrs. Bird said pleasantly, "Of course you wouldn't wear hats such a short distance. I forgot when I asked. Now will you come right into Miss Carol's room? She is so anxious to see you." Just then, Sarah Maud came up the back stairs, so radiant with joy from her secret interview with the cook that Peter could have pinched her with a clear conscience, and Carol gave them a joyful welcome. "But where is baby Larry?" she cried, looking over the group with a searching eye. "Didn't he come?" Larry! Larry! Goodness gracious, where was Larry? They were all sure that he had come in with them, for Susan remembered scolding him for tripping over the doormat. Uncle Jack went into convulsions of laughter. "Are you sure there were 9 of you?" he asked. "I think so, sir," said Peoria timidly. "But anyhow, there was Larry," and she showed signs of weeping. "Oh, well, cheer up," cried Uncle Jack. "Probably he's not lost, only mislaid. I'll go and find him before you can say Jack Robinson." "I'll go too, if you please, sir," said Sarah Maud, "for it was my place to mind him, and if he's lost I can't relish my victuals." The other Ruggleses stood rooted to the floor. Was this a dinner party, forsooth? And if so, why were such things ever spoken of as festive occasions? Sarah Maud went out through the hall, calling, "Larry! Larry!" and without any interval of suspense, a thin voice piped up from below, "Here I be!" The truth was that Larry, being deserted by his natural guardian, dropped behind the rest and wriggled into the hat tree to wait for her. Having no notion of walking unprotected into the jaws of a fashionable entertainment, finding that she did not come, he tried to crawl from his refuge and call somebody. One dark and dreadful ending to a tragic day, he found that he was too much entwined with umbrellas and canes to move a single step. He was afraid to yell. When I have said this of Larry Ruggles, I have pictured a state of helpless terror that ought to wring tears from every eye, and the sound of Sarah Maud's beloved voice, some seconds later, was like a strain of angel music in his ears. Uncle Jack dried his tears, carried him upstairs, and soon had him in breathless fits of laughter, while Carol so made the other Ruggleses forget themselves that they were presently talking like accomplished diners out. Carol's bed had been moved into the farthest corner of the room, and she was lying on the outside, dressed in a wonderful dressing gown that looked like a fleecy cloud. Her golden hair fell in fluffy curls over her white forehead and neck. Her cheeks flushed delicately. Her eyes beamed with joy, and the children told their mother afterward that she looked as beautiful as the angels in the picture books. There was a great bustle behind a huge screen in another part of the room, and at 5:30 this was taken away, and the Christmas dinner table stood revealed. What a wonderful sight it was to the poor little Ruggles children, who ate their sometimes scanty meals on the kitchen table. It blazed with tall, colored candles. It gleamed with glass and silver. It blushed with flowers. It groaned with good things to eat. So it was not strange that the Ruggleses, forgetting altogether that their mother was a McGrill, shrieked in admiration of the fairy spectacle. But Larry's behavior was the most disgraceful, for he stood not upon the order of his going, but went at once for a high chair that pointed unmistakably to him, climbed up like a squirrel, gave a comprehensive look at the turkey, clapped his hands in ecstasy, rested his fat arms on the table, and cried with joy, "I beat the whole lot of you!" Carol laughed until she cried, giving orders meanwhile. "Uncle Jack, please sit at the head, Sarah Maud at the foot, and that will leave 4 on each side. Mamma is going to help Elfrida, so that the children need not look after each other, but just have a good time." A sprig of holly lay by each plate, and nothing would do but each little Ruggles must leave his seat and have it pinned on by Carol. And as each course was served, one of them pleaded to take something to her. There was hurrying to and fro, I can assure you, for it is quite a difficult matter to serve a Christmas dinner on the 3rd floor of a great city house. But even if it had been necessary to carry every dish up a rope ladder, the servants would gladly have done so. There were turkey and chicken, with delicious gravy and stuffing, and there were 6 vegetables, with cranberry jelly, and celery, and pickles. And as for the way those delicacies were served, the Ruggleses never forgot it as long as they lived. Peter nudged Kitty, who sat next to him, and said, "Look, will you? Every feller's got his own particular butter. I suppose that's to show you can eat that and no more." "No, it ain't neither, for that pig of a Peory's just gotten another helping." "Yes," whispered Kitty, "and the napkins are marked with big red letters. I wonder if that's so nobody'll nip them. And oh, Peter, look at the pictures sticking right up on the dishes. Did you ever? The plums is all took out of my cranberry sauce, and it's frizzed to a stiff gel," whispered Peoria in wild excitement. "Ha! I got a wishbone," sang Larry, regardless of Sarah Maud's frown, after which she asked to have his seat changed, giving as an excuse that he generally sat beside her and would feel strange, the true reason being that she desired to kick him gently under the table whenever he passed what might be termed the McGrill line. "I declare to goodness," murmured Susan on the other side, "there's so much to look at I can't scarcely eat nothing." "Bet your life I can," said Peter, who had kept one servant busily employed ever since he sat down, for luckily no one was asked by Uncle Jack whether he would have a second helping, but the dishes were quietly passed under their noses, and not a single Ruggles refused anything that was offered to him, even unto the 7th time. Then, when Carol and Uncle Jack perceived that more turkey was a physical impossibility, the meats were taken off, and the dessert was brought in, a dessert that would have frightened a strong man after such a dinner as had preceded it. Not so the Ruggleses, for a strong man is nothing to a small boy, and they kindled to the dessert as if the turkey had been a dream, and the 6 vegetables an optical illusion. There were plum pudding, mince pie, and ice cream, and there were nuts and raisins and oranges. Kitty chose ice cream, explaining that she knew it by sight, though she hadn't never tasted none. But all the rest took the entire variety, without any regard to consequences. "My dear child," whispered Uncle Jack as he took Carol an orange, "there is no doubt about the necessity of this feast, but I do advise you after this to have them twice a year, or quarterly perhaps, for the way these children eat is positively dangerous. I assure you I tremble for that terrible Peoria." "Never mind," laughed Carol. "Let them have enough for once. It does my heart good to see them, and they shall come oftener next year." The feast being over, the Ruggleses lay back in their chairs languidly, like little gorged boa constrictors, and the table was cleared in a trice. Then a door was opened into the next room, and there, in a corner, facing Carol's bed, which had been wheeled as close as possible, stood the brilliantly lighted Christmas tree, glittering with gilded walnuts and tiny silver balloons, and wreathed with snowy chains of popcorn. The presents had been bought mostly with Carol's story money, and were selected after long consultations with Mrs. Bird. Each girl had a blue knitted hood, and each boy a red crocheted comforter, all made by Mama, Carol, and Elfrida. "Because if you buy everything, it doesn't show so much love," said Carol. Then every girl had a pretty plaid dress of a different color, and every boy a warm coat of the right size. Here the useful presents stopped, and they were quite enough, but Carol had pleaded to give them something for fun. "I know they need the clothes," she had said, when they were talking the matter over just after Thanksgiving, "but they don't care much for them after all. Now, Papa, won't you please let me go without part of my presents this year, and give me the money they would cost, to buy something to amuse the Ruggleses?" "You can have both," said Mr. Bird promptly. "Is there any need of my little girl's going without her own Christmas, I should like to know? Spend all the money you like." "But that isn't the thing," objected Carol, nestling close to her father. "It wouldn't be mine. What is the use? Haven't I almost everything already? And am I not the happiest girl in the world this year, with Uncle Jack and Donald at home? You know very well it is more blessed to give than to receive, so why won't you let me do it? You never look half as happy when you are getting your presents as you are when you're giving us ours. Now, Papa, submit, or I shall have to be very firm and disagreeable with you." "Very well, Your Highness, I surrender." "That's a dear Papa. Now, what were you going to give me? Confess." "A bronze figure of Santa Claus, and in the little round belly that shakes when he laughs, like a bowlful of jelly, is a wonderful clock. Oh, you would never give it up if you could see it." "Nonsense," laughed Carol. "As I never have to get up to go to breakfast, nor to go to bed, nor to catch trains, I think my old clock will do very well. Now, Mamma, what were you going to give me?" "Oh, I hadn't decided. A few more books, and a gold thimble, and a smelling bottle, and a music box, perhaps." "Poor Carol," laughed the child merrily. "She can afford to give up these lovely things, for there will still be left Uncle Jack and Donald and Paul and Hugh and Uncle Rob and Aunt Elsie and a dozen other people to fill her Christmas stocking." So Carol had her way, as she generally did, but it was usually a good way, which was fortunate under the circumstances. And Sarah Maud had a set of Miss Alcott's books, and Peter a modest silver watch, Cornelius a tool chest, Clement a dog-house for his lame puppy, Larry a magnificent Noah's Ark, and each of the younger girls a beautiful doll. You can very well believe that everyone was very merry and very thankful. All the family, from Mr. Bird down to the cook, said that they had never seen so much happiness in the space of 3 hours. But it had to end as all things do. The candles flickered and went out. The tree was left alone with its gilded ornaments, and Mrs. Bird sent the children downstairs at 8:30, thinking that Carol looked tired. "Now, my darling, you have done quite enough for one day," said Mrs. Bird, getting Carol into her little nightgown. "I am afraid you will feel worse tomorrow, and that would be a sad ending to such a charming evening." "Oh, wasn't it a lovely, lovely time?" sighed Carol. "From first to last, everything was just right. I shall never forget Larry's face when he looked at the turkey, nor Peter's when he saw his watch, nor that sweet, sweet Kitty's smile when she kissed her dolly, nor the tears in poor Sarah Maud's eyes when she thanked me for her books, nor— But we mustn't talk any longer about it tonight," said Mrs. Bird anxiously. "You are too tired, dear." "I am not so very tired, Mamma. I have felt well all day, not a bit of pain anywhere. Perhaps this has done me good." "Perhaps, I hope so. There was no noise or confusion. It was just a merry time. Now may I close the door and leave you alone, dear? Papa and I will steal in softly by and by to see if you are all right. But I think you need to be very quiet." "Oh, I'm willing to stay by myself, but I am not sleepy yet, and I am going to hear the music, you know. Yes, I have opened the window a little and put the screen in front of it so that you won't feel the air. Can I have the shutters open? And won't you turn my bed, please? This morning I woke ever so early, and one bright, beautiful star shone in that eastern window. I never noticed it before, and I thought of the star in the east that guided the wise men to the place where the baby Jesus was. Good night, Mamma. Such a happy, happy day. Good night, my precious Christmas carol, Mother's blessed Christmas child." "Bend your head a minute, Mother dear," whispered Carol, calling her mother back. "Mamma dear, I do think that we have kept Christ's birthday this time just as he would like it. Don't you?" "I am sure of it," said Miss Bird softly. Chapter 7. The Birdling Flies Away. The Ruggleses had finished a last romp in the library with Paul and Hugh, and Uncle Jack had taken them home, and stayed a while to chat with Mrs. Ruggles, who opened the door for them, her face all aglow with excitement and delight. When Kitty and Clem showed her the oranges and nuts that they had kept for her, she astonished them by saying that at 6 o'clock Mrs. Bird had sent her in the finest dinner she had ever seen in her life, and not only that, but a piece of dress goods that must have cost $1 a yard if it cost a cent. As Uncle Jack went down the rickety steps, he looked back into the window for a last glimpse of the family, as the children gathered about their mother, showing their beautiful presents again and again, and then upward to a window in the great house yonder. A little child shall lead them, he thought. Well, if anything ever happens to Carol, I will take the Ruggleses under my wing. "Softly, Uncle Jack," whispered the boys as he walked into the library a little while later. "We are listening to the music in the church. The choir has sung Carol, Brothers, Carol, and now we think the organist is beginning to play My Own Country for Carol." "I hope she hears it," said Mrs. Bird, "but they are very late tonight, and I dare not speak to her, lest she be asleep. It's almost 10 o'clock. The boy soprano, clad in white surplice, stood in the organ loft. The light shone full upon his crown of fair hair, and his pale face with its serious blue eyes looked paler than usual. Perhaps it was something in the tender thrill of the voice, or in the sweet words, but there were tears in many eyes, both in the church and in the great house next door. "I am far from my home, I am weary often whiles, for the longed-for home bringin', and my father's welcome smiles. And I'll never be full content until my eyes do see the golden gates of heaven in my own country. The earth is decked with flowers, many tinted, fresh and gay, and the birdies warble blithely, for my Father made them so. But these sights and these sounds will as nothing be to me when I hear the angels singing in my own country. Like a bairn to its mother, a wee birdie to its nest, I fain would be going now into my Father's breast, for he gathers in his arms helpless, worthless lambs like me, and carries them himself to his own country." There were tears in many eyes, but not in Carol's. The loving heart had quietly ceased to beat, and the wee birdie in the great house had flown to its home nest. Carol had fallen asleep. But as to this song, I think perhaps I cannot say she heard it after all. So sad an ending to a happy day, perhaps to those who were left, and yet Carol's mother, even in the freshness of her grief, was glad that her darling had slipped away on the loveliest day of her life, out of its glad content, into everlasting peace. She was glad that she had gone as she had come, on the wings of song, when all the world was brimming over with joy, glad of every grateful smile, of every joyous burst of laughter, of every loving thought and word and deed the dear last day had brought. Sadness reigned, it is true, in the little house behind the garden, and one day poor Sarah Maud, with a courage born of despair, threw on her hood and shawl, walked straight to a certain house a mile away, up the marble steps, into good Dr. Bartol's office, falling at his feet as she cried, "Oh, sir, it was me and our children that went to Miss Carol's last dinner party, and if we made her worse, we can't ever be happy again." Then the kind old gentleman took her rough hand in his, and told her to dry her tears, for neither she nor any of her flock had hastened Carol's flight. Indeed, he said, that had it not been for the strong hopes and wishes that filled her tired heart, she could not have stayed long enough to keep that last Merry Christmas with her dear ones. And so the old years, fraught with memories, die one after another, and the new years, bright with hopes, are born to take their places, but Carol lives again in every chime of Christmas bells that peal glad tidings, and in every Christmas anthem sung by childish voices. The end. This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to some holiday tales representing Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. You can find a link to our podcast on the Marshall Public Library webpage, www.marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.